Frank Fritz, the beloved co-host of American Pickers, died suddenly on September 30, 2024 at the age of 60. But it wasn't just his sudden death that made his family and friends sad. It was the staggering fortune he left behind. A fortune that would change how his family saw him and cause tears, tension, and maybe even a few surprises. But let's go back in time a bit before we talk about the millions he left behind. Let's look at the last moments of a man who spent his life on the road picking America's forgotten treasures, only to become one himself. It was no secret that Frank's health had been getting worse in the years before he died. He had a stroke in 2022, and complications from that cerebral infarction would eventually kill him 2 years later, according to TMZ. The death certificate listed the cause as late sequela of cerebral infarction, which is a medical term for damage from the stroke that his body could not recover from. Frank was also dealing with aortic stenosis, a condition that makes it hard for blood to flow properly through the heart. It was a double blow, and even the toughest pickers can't change fate. The two had been best friends since middle school, bonding over their love of picking. Fame and money can break up even the strongest friendships. By 2021, Frank and Mike's relationship had reached its lowest point. In an interview with his son, Frank wasn't afraid to air the dirty laundry. He accused Mike of turning American Pickers into a one-man show, comparing their dynamic to that of Steven Tyler and the rest of Aerosmith. Frank said, "It's like you've got Aerosmith, and there's Steven Tyler. I found my spot. I'm second, and he's number." Frank had a stroke in 2022, but Mike and Frank started talking again by 2023, and Mike wasn't going to let his friend die without making things right. "I got the call that he wasn't doing well, and Mike told people, 'I just feel blessed that I was able to get there.'" Mike described Frank's last moments with such tenderness that it could soften even the hardest hearts. "I was there for about an hour before he passed. I was holding his hand and rubbing it. When he took his last breath, I put my fingers on his chest and closed his eyes. At that moment it wasn't about antiques, it was about Antiques TV. Finding peace before the final curtain fell. But Frank Fritz wasn't just a man with a touching story. He was also a man who turned a childhood hobby into a multi-million-dollar empire. Born in Davenport, Iowa, Frank had always been a collector, rocks, beer cans, you name it. But it wasn't until he became a fire inspector and spent 25 years checking fire safety equipment that he realized he could make a living finding rare items. By the time American Pickers started airing on the History Channel in 2010, he had already realized this. Along with Mike Wolfe and Danielle Colby, Frank traveled across the country looking for hidden treasures in barns, garages, and scrapyards. The show quickly became a hit with viewers who loved the thrill of discovery and the nostalgia of forgotten Americana. With 22 seasons and 300 episodes, American Pickers didn't just show antiques, it also showed Frank's sharp eye and contagious passion. His ability to see value in things other people would have thrown away made him a household name. Frank also wrote 2 best-selling books about antiques, American Pickers, A Guide to Picking in 2011, and How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles in 2013. These books solidified his reputation as an expert in the field. And let's not forget Frank Fritz Finds' antique shop in Savannah, Illinois. It was a thriving business that drew collectors and fans from all over the world. At the time of his death, Frank's net worth was estimated to be a cool $6 million. Yes, the man who used to look through scrapyards for rusty signs and old motorcycles had built up a fortune that many people in the entertainment business could only dream of. But here's the catch. What happens to all that money? When someone dies leaving behind such a large fortune, you'd expect some family members to cry, both from grief and from the weight of what they've lost. Frank's death didn't just leave an emotional void, it also left a financial legacy that would change the lives of his loved ones. Not all tears are the same. Some were tears of thanks because Frank's kindness was well known and his family and friends knew he had taken care of them in his last days. But there were also tears of regret because of chances missed to make peace and words not said. And of course, there were tears of tension, because when millions are at stake, even the closest families can fight. But what did Frank's will say about who would get his multi-million-dollar estate? Frank had the foresight to file his will with the court a year before he died on October 23, 2023. His health had already been steadily declining since his stroke in 2022, and no one expected things to get worse so quickly. But Frank wasn't one to leave things to chance. At least not when it came to his money. His son, in the US, reported that Midwest One Bank, which had been named his conservator after his stroke, was also named the XX core of his estate in the will. Whatever secrets were inside were kept safe, But one thing was clear, plans for his $6 million fortune were approved just a few weeks after he died, on October 18, 2024. But let's go back to the events that led up to that. Frank's crippling stroke in July 2022 at his Iowa farmhouse was more than just a health scare. It was a turning point that took control of his life away from him and put it in the hands of others. He was so badly affected by the stroke that he couldn't even take care of himself. Soon, Frank's family and friends filed for conservatorship and guardianship, putting his finances and personal matters in the hands of others. Midwest One Bank took care of his money, and his longtime friend Chris Davis became his guardian, keeping an eye on everything from his physical therapy appointments to his treatment for Crohn's disease. There was also the matter of his prized possessions, like his huge collection of antiques, vintage motorcycles, and other cool stuff. His property was filled with memorabilia that made buildings look like museums of American nostalgia. The conservatorship papers showed that these treasures hadn't been fully inventoried, but the plan was to keep them mostly the same, with some items used to stock his antique store Fritz Finds in Savannah, Illinois. But what about his family? They were left behind after he died, and how did they fit into the story of his wealth? This is where things get complicated. Frank never told his family about his wealth. There were rumors in 2021 that he was getting married to his longtime girlfriend Diane, but the truth was that they had broken up a long time before he died. Their relationship fell apart because of betrayal and heartbreak. In an interview with his son in July 2021, Frank said that he had planned to marry Diane and even bought a new house for them. But while he was on the road filming American Pickers, he found out she had another boyfriend back home. "It hurt my feelings, my self-esteem, and my whole world," he said. He turned to drinking, to dull the pain, which was the start of a long and painful battle with addiction. Diane, for her part, denied Frank's story. "It's not true what he's saying," she told her son. "If he's trying to make me look like the bad person, of course I'm going to say it's not true because it's not." But by 2019, the damage was done, the relationship was over, and Frank was left to put together the pieces of a life he thought he had. Frank didn't have a wife or children, so he turned to family friends like Chris Davis, who became his guardian after the stroke, and Jerry Gendro, a longtime friend who talked openly about Frank's last months. Jerry remembered visits to see Frank in the nursing home, where one side of his body was completely paralyzed. He would lift his arm up and it would just drop. It must be hard to be completely bedridden. Frank's frustration was palpable, but he couldn't say what was bothering him. He wanted to say that some days were better than others, but Jerry said it best. "I think Frank could have lived a lot longer if the will to live had been there." And then there was Mike W. Wolfe, who had been both Frank's best friend and his worst enemy. They had gone from being middle school friends to co-hosts of one of the History Channel's biggest shows to feuding co-workers, but by the time Frank's health got worse, their relationship had been a roller coaster. Even though they were happy again, there was still the question of whether Mike Wolfe would get any of Frank's money. It's hard to say because the will was sealed, so the exact details of how Frank's estate will be split are unknown. What we do know is that Frank's money was closely linked to his antique collection and his store, Fritz Finds. His friend Jerry hinted that an auction might be planned to take advantage of Frank's fans. "Because he had so many fans, I would make sure that his treasures went to people who would really enjoy them." As Jerry said, "I think he'll do really well with an auction." While the antique world was abuzz with rumors about what would happen to Frank's collection, his family, both biological and chosen, struggled with the emotional weight of his death. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the man who had left a lasting impression on their lives through his struggles with addiction, and Frank's last years were shaped by his health in ways that no amount of money could fix. His battle with addiction had been a long and painful one, starting with heartbreak and continuing for years with chronic pain from Crohn's disease and a broken back. The back injury required surgery in 2019, but recovery was not easy. Frank found comfort in painkillers, but they quickly turned into addiction. By the time he left American Pickers in 2020, his addiction was no longer a secret among those closest to him. Mike Wolfe in particular had. After seeing how much it hurt his friend, Mike admitted that he set up interventions, pushed Frank to go to rehab, and never gave up hope that he could get better. But how much did Frank Fritz's battle with addiction and health problems cost him financially and emotionally? The answer might surprise you. At the height of his career, Frank had a comfortable $6 million nest egg, but by the time of his death, a big chunk of that money had been spent on other things. When Frank had his stroke in 2022, he spent $30,000 a month on medical and in-home care. That's almost $36,000 a year, which is an unbelievable amount of money that even a reality TV star would have a hard time keeping up for a long time. This wasn't just for hospital bills, it also included round-the-clock nursing, physical therapy, and other specialized treatments to deal with the effects of his stroke and his ongoing battle with Crohn's disease. Frank Fritz turned his life's work into treasured items that will be passed down through generations. But he left behind something much more valuable than antiques and TV fame, a reminder that life is about the journey, not just the destination. He taught us that success isn't just about how much you earn, but also about how much you love what you do. Even in his struggles, he taught us to be strong, humble, and to never give up, no matter how hard things get. As Frank himself said, life is what you do. If you don't put much into it, you don't get much out of it. He put everything into his work, his friendships, and his passions. His fortune may have gone down because of medical bills, but his legacy lives on in the treasures he found, the people he inspired, and the many memories he left behind. Even though the road may have been rough, Frank wrote it with heart, humor, and an unbreakable spirit that will never be forgotten.